We begin today's program with this year's China-EU high-level economic and trade dialogue, which is seen as candid and pragmatic by both sides. In a video meeting with his EU counterpart on Tuesday, Chinese Vice Premier Liu He called for China and the EU to work hand in hand toward economic recovery and multilateralism. The two sides are inching closer to sealing an investment deal that's been 7 years in the making. As the investment treaty talks reach a crucial point, Washington is watching closely amid a worsening trade war with China and all the other factors involving geopolitics. What does the China-EU investment treaty mean to the two mega markets as well as the global economy, and how will EU handle the worsening relations between China and the U.S.? What does that mean for Brussels and Beijing? Let's find out. More on the China-EU dialogue. We are joined in Beijing, HONGJIAN, Director of the European Studies from the China Institute of International Studies. Meanwhile, we also have in Brussels FRASER Cameron, Senior Advisor at the European Policy Center in Brussels. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. The meeting came to an end following a series of meetings taking place between leaders from China and the European countries. Now, this time, bilateral investment had been thoroughly discussed, and it's expected to have some results in the near future. Mr. Cameron, what kind of prospects are we have?
I think the prospects have improved for a number of reasons. First, because of the pandemic, it's imperative that the European Union and China cooperate together. Secondly, I think, the trade war between the US and China is something that's detrimental to the global economy, and I think China really wants to have a deal with the EU to show that it is committed to a multilateral system. And thirdly, I think it's in the interest of both the EU and China to up their game. There are so many areas where we can and should be working together in the trade and investment field. And I think the talks yesterday were a positive signal that we should be moving towards an agreement in the second half of this year.
As of the end of 2018, the EU's total investment in China reached over $130 billion, making it China's third largest source of investment. At the same time, China's direct investment in the EU countries has been declining, though, for the past 3 consecutive years. If you look at these numbers, certainly that shows a trend. Some say it's quite worrisome. Mr. Cui, from China's perspective, a bilateral investment agreement, and looking at these numbers, can we expect anything soon?
Bilateral investment agreement, I think now it shows a very big importance for firstly promoting the confidence with each other, between China and the EU. If we look at the number of the investment for both two sides, we can find in recent years, yes, China tried to promote its investment in Europe. But in recent years, especially from the 17, 18, or 19, we can find out that there are more and more, the sensitive or censorship mechanism from some member states, and even on the level of the European Union. I think it gives some negative impact on this confidence from especially Chinese investors towards the European market. So I think that's the importance that we could find as just like the European Union side mentioned that they like a kind of reciprocal, treatment, and also any kind of favorable policy environment. I think that now the investment agreement is trying to, find the way approach for both two sides. That firstly the fair and then reciprocal, treatment to each other.
Mr. Cameron, let me ask you a direct question. Can the EU countries as a whole be able to endure the political pressure coming out of Washington to, quote-unquote, decouple from China? Can the EU has its own sort of judgment in terms of what approach to take with China and do it accordingly?
The simple answer is yes. The EU looks after its own interests. And this has been shown time and time again. I mean, there's pressure from the US, there's pressure from China, from other countries, but essentially what the role of the European institutions is to do is to look at the combined interests of all the 27 member states and make a judgment on what is the best common interest. And that's exactly what they've been doing in the negotiations with China. And of course, there will be pressure from outside, but the EU takes its own course.
Would the EU countries be able to achieve consensus? As we know, some members are closer to Washington, others are not necessarily so. Some have some issues, others feel totally safe. Very different situations.
Well, in trade policy, there is a united front. The European Commission has a sovereign right to negotiate trade agreements and is in the lead on this. Obviously, it consults with all the member states, but as regards the progress in the Comprehensive Investment Agreement, there is broad agreement throughout the 27. We should be aiming for a successful and wide-ranging agreement. I think the talks yesterday demonstrated this. There was good progress on a level playing field. There's now going to be further work on market access, on sustainable development, and there'll be a follow-up meeting at a summit level between the President of the Commission, the Council, plus Chancellor Merkel, with Xi Jinping on the 14th of September. So I think that's a good timetable.
Yes. Mr. Cui, on those issues, will China and the EU be able to find some common grounds, ranging from IPR to the so-called reciprocity to various kinds of factors that might have an impact on the economic and technological policies? Will China be able to step forward and say, you know, on these issues, we're going to do what? And what about you in the EU? What are you going to do?
If we look at this negotiation process so far, we can find on some technical issues, both sides, I mean, China and EU, they achieved a lot of consensus. But now maybe on some core issues, including some, for example, the big consensus from the European side on China about the state-owned companies, the subsidies issue, and also you know, public procurement issue and some other. So I think now, yes, it becomes some barriers for this negotiation. But I think now for China, it's also a big test case. That how could China to make some more confidence to push forward its reform and opening up? But of course, I think from on the European side, especially from China's perspective, we need to understand what's the difference between the reciprocity and also similarity. Because I think that now we should be careful once it touches some issue of you know, systemic or some even you know, political system. I don't think it's a smart way for European side try to find a more political, economic, I mean, explanation about any you know, efforts from European side. Because I think from China's perspective, the investment agreement, indeed, it looks like for it looks for some more commonality, but not just a game of that China should follow everything from a European side.
Mr. Cameron, your comment.
The name of the game will be reciprocity. Essentially, the EU is saying, look, you want to invest here and your companies have a green light. We want a similar green light in China. So that's the bottom line. And I think yesterday there was considerable progress on this move towards a level playing field. There still has to be some further progress on market access, particularly financial services, agriculture, and so on. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and that's important. And at the same time, you know, it's not just about the Comprehensive Investment Agreement. There are very good talks, I understand, also in terms of regulatory alignment, in terms of how we deal with other issues, including dealing with debt relief, dealing with the international role of the RMB and the euro. So we are moving beyond just the narrow scope of the investment talks to have a much wider, comprehensive economic relationship.
I have to ask you, Mr. Cameron, how will the EU countries be free from some ideological pressure coming either out of Washington or in some capitals within the EU countries, trying to shape either the bilateral investment treaty or other international cooperation between China and the EU with ideologies, with politics, with geopolitics. That's probably the EU countries have to answer China about, and also build confidence in China about the EU.
Well, you'll find that very few European countries, and certainly not the EU institutions, are following the US line. They're not looking at this in an ideological war. Nobody's talking about a new Cold War in Europe. They're wanting to, as I say, protect European interests. And many, I guess, are now waiting to see what will be the outcome of the US election just in a few months' time, and we might see a shift in American policy. So in no way is the EU position beholden to the ideological statements coming out of the current administration in Washington.
You know, COVID-19 cases, if you look at it worldwide, have surpassed already 16 million and nearly 650,000 deaths. The global surge in COVID-19 cases is mainly driven by intense transmission in the relatively few countries. China and the EU countries appear to have contained the virus so far. So, which means there is a possibility of cooperation, and there is a possibility of these economies waking up first and try to set the stage for all the others who might follow later. So now that is quite a historical task if you look at it from afar. Mr. Cameron, how do you think China and the EU will be able to grasp this opportunity, particularly on the international stage, which you emphasized once and again earlier?
Well, the EU was critical, for example, of the US decision to withdraw from the WHO. The EU has said there must be a global effort here involving China, both to develop a vaccine and to ensure that its treatment is worldwide and it's not, just one country that hoards any sort of breakthrough. That's a common position, I think, shared by the EU and China. I think, too, there must be, going forward, a much deeper analysis of global health issues. And here, again, the EU and China should be playing a leading role in terms of how to ensure that we have a properly funded international body, perhaps a reformed WHO, that can ensure that we mitigate against any further pandemics. Because, I mean, the hit to the global economy has been enormous, as you just said, and we have to try and ensure that this is not repeated.
Mr. Cui from China, your thoughts about that? In the international context, how much common ground China and the EU could have, and, in fact, make sure they are grounded, not just talk about it, grounded before even the U.S. election?
I think that firstly, China and the EU, we need to continue some existing cooperation. And just like you mentioned, not just only talk, and also we need to have some more actions. And indeed, that how about the synergy between the BRI and the connectivity between Europe and Asia proposed from the European Union side. And also, I think now it will give some very fresh meaning to this connectivity issue after the pandemic or in the pandemic. And secondly, I think that yes, China and the EU, we should find some more, new fields for cooperation. Especially, we need to find out more coordination on this, strategy and also economic policies. For example, how about the green industry and also digital industry? Now it has been, set by the European Union side as its major industry strategy in next 7 or 10 years.
Yes, indeed. We need to see the lower hanging fruits, in fact. That's very crucial at a time of a pandemic and crisis. Mr. Cameron, about that, what kind of lower hanging fruits can we have?
I think what Professor Xi said is right. I mean, the Green Deal is going to be hugely important for Europe and China going forward. And there are some voices saying that because of the COVID pandemic, we can't pay so much attention to the investment into green technology. I think that's wrong. I think it's really important to seize the opportunity to move forward to a different type of energy-based economy, both in Europe and in China. I think public opinion would support that. And so this is one, I think, low-hanging fruit where the two sides can cooperate and also put pressure on the US and other countries in the world to ensure that they live up to the Paris climate change commitment.
If you look at what's going on between China and the EU over the past few months, actually very active despite of the pandemic. Leaders of China and the EU have maintained close communication since the outbreak of corona pandemic. On June the 22nd, for example, first summit took place between the new EU leadership team and China's President Xi Jinping and Premier Li He. Chinese officials have also met virtually with their German and French counterparts, foreign ministers, for example, earlier this month, covering a wide range of topics from climate change and biodiversity, agriculture and nuclear power, and the list goes on. But the question once again is, how efficient will this relationship develop? And will that be able to brave the storm of geopolitics to make sure some grounded projects really going on and it's going to benefit the peoples of both sides? That's the key, isn't it, Mr. Cui?
Yes, I think now we need to find out more way for the China and the EU to narrow down the gap between the government-to-government cooperation and the people-to-people contact. Even now, as we know that this year, not only because of a pandemic and also because of the tension between China and the US, I think that now it's maybe it's a very important time now for China and the EU. We need to find out the very pragmatic approach to help the mutual understanding for peoples.
Mr. Cameron, let me put a fundamental question to you. Now, observing from Brussels, I'm sure you have already seen so many things happen between China and the United States just over the past 1 month or two. There was a trade war, quote unquote, and then it developed into a geopolitical, now even an ideological war rhetoric out of Washington toward China. Some were even claiming the engaging China policy was a total failure, even though that was very much criticized inside the United States. But people are worried, Mr. Cameron, that there even be accidents on the South China Sea that could be spiraling out of control. So when EU think about relation with China in a strategic way, how do you look at the best scenarios and the worst scenarios that another capital might impact on this relationship?
Well, the Trump administration is pretty unpredictable, and before most elections in the US, there's always a bit of China bashing that goes on, and this time it's been ratcheted up, particularly by Secretary Pompeo and his speech last week in California. But if you look at the speech, there's very little actually policy. It's just rhetoric. And therefore, as I said, the EU is essentially now in a waiting mode to see and hope that the Biden administration would come in and change the tone.
Now, Mr. Cui, final question to you also about that context. The worst case scenario and the possibility that from WHO and WTO, China can work with other partners in this international context rather than focusing on these kinds of ideological rhetorics and so-called bilateral action and also reaction.
Firstly, we need to go back to a more pragmatic way. I mean, we need to have more wisdom to transfer some ideological and political issue into a more technical issue. For example, just like we take the case of the BIP negotiation. Secondly, I think that for China and EU, especially, we need to find out more the actions to implement the multilateral cooperation. Even now, as we know, there's still some suspicions from European side on China that China will be loyal to multilateralism or not. And the third is, how could we try to work together, I mean, especially for China and EU, to produce more and more achievements. And then we need to try to keep attractivities to United States, especially if we look at the American politics after this November.
I want to thank the two of you. HONGJIAN and FRASER Cameron helping us to understand your own perspective. All the best. Be safe. Thank you.